We begin with North Korea today, a country that's been facing UN sanctions since 2006 over its nuclear weapons program. There are nearly a dozen UN sanctions that target individuals and the government, this in addition to sanctions from the European Union and the United States. UN sanctions are enforced by individual member states, and as we see in the following report, that isn't straightforward or even easy.
Watching over the Yellow Sea, an area between the Korean peninsula and China where illegal imports are transported into North Korea. The French Navy soldiers are part of an international mission to enforce UN sanctions on Pyongyang since 2018. The team of 6 arrived in Japan from French Polynesia in mid-October and have since carried out regular checks.
We're being asked to collect photos, videos, radio recordings, and to transmit all of these elements to the UN, which will be able to study and investigate the case in the event of a proven violation.
For France, the missions are a way to increase its profile in the region. Here, France controls an exclusive economic zone of 9 million square kilometers, which has a strategic value given China's growing territorial ambitions. On board their Falcon 200 aircraft, the team uses radar and other equipment to monitor suspicious activities.
We're going to monitor the vessels in the area. We'll especially look at those that are stationary and in pairs, so 2 vessels side by side. We're going to get closer to them, but these vessels will generally try to hide themselves.
A sudden alert. The team spots 2 stationary ships, a fully loaded large ship connected to a smaller merchant ship, ideal for smuggling goods.
We'll carry out what we call a challenge. We ask a number of questions which will enable us to collect information that we can compare with databases and the regulations. And so, with all this evidence, the United Nations will be able to determine whether there's been a possible violation or not.
If a violation is found, the vessel's owners could face prosecution. With the French crew serving as watchful eyes for the UN, the sanction breakers have fewer places to hide.
For more, I'm joined now by Dr. Sojin Lim, a senior lecturer in Korean Studies at the University of Central Lancashire. Dr. Lim, how hard is it to enforce UN sanctions against North Korea?
Oh, yes. So the sanctions themselves are not hard law. It's UN-imposed soft law, which means even though a country don't quite comply with sanctions, there is not such physical way to punish against. Because of that, it is not easy to impose the sanctions on one country. And on top of that, it should be the surrounding countries' cooperation to come along with. For example, for North Korean case, it's not only about North Korea, but it also should come from the cooperation with other countries like China and Russia. But at the moment, quite recently, Russia and China propose to lift sanctions against North Korea, which means US or France or UK stance are very different now from the China and Russia. And with this kind of mechanism, it's really not easy to impose sanctions into North Korea 100% fully.
We just showed our viewers activities of the French Navy that is patrolling the waters around North Korea, trying to ensure that these sanctions are imposed. Would you therefore say that actions like those don't really help much when it comes to implementing sanctions, UN sanctions against North Korea?
So those are the individual countries' approach. It's not only France. Recently, Australia also tried a similar approach. But at the same time, if we think about the end goal of the sanctions, it's change of the regime. But no, not many scholars, including me, don't think sanctions would successfully change the regime in North Korea. And from the history, not many sanctions were successful. And it's more about the people who are in the country who suffer from sanctions more than the regime itself. Because of that, we kind of need to think about the other way around, how we can deliver sanctions in a more effective way rather than just pushing it in a way of the enforcement or the punishment. We can think about something more constructive, but at the moment, not many countries want to buy that kind of approach. And because of that reason, individual countries' approach like France or Australia can help sanctions a little bit, but not entirely.
What kind of a new approach would be required?
We can think of having a step back way, which means we can try to lift the sanctions partially, which comes with some conditions attached. And for example, if we lift sanctions in terms of development aid, so currently humanitarian aid already can be exempted from the current sanction regime. But if we think about the development aid, providing development aid by lifting sanctions, but coming up with strong monitoring and evaluation mechanism, which means when you provide aid, the North Korea should abide by monitoring and evaluation so that those aid shouldn't be used for the military actions or nuclear program development, but used for people, then in that way we can think in a more constructive way.
What is the impact, Dr. Lim, of sanctions such as these on North Korean citizens?
So the sanctions on North Korea began from 2006, but throughout the last 20 years, the very recent one was 2016 and 2017 sanctions, which included the ban for the oils or the agricultural fertilizer products or the machineries for agriculture. So that impacted North Koreans' agricultural products. And because of that, North Koreans are suffering from food shortage. So that, in that sense, sanctions are harming people than the regime itself.
Dr. Sojin Lim, we'll have to leave it there for the time being, but thank you so much for joining us today. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
North Korean leader Kim Jong Un has acknowledged the food situation in his country is tense. International sanctions and the COVID pandemic have hit people's livelihoods there so hard that a UN expert is warning that vulnerable groups are at risk of starving. So the regime in Pyongyang is promoting alternative sources of nutrition.
Farming to fight famine. Pyongyang's latest policy aims to curb growing hunger in the world's most isolated nation. Food insecurity and malnutrition are nothing new in North Korea. Pandemic restrictions have further crippled an economy already struggling under international sanctions. Pyongyang hopes rabbits will be part of the answer. Our party has the policy, turn grass into meat. And if stock breeding goes well, we are the ones who benefit. Because we are here in a farming area, we have lots of grass and vegetation. And so we really have advantageous conditions for rabbit breeding. If we're careful to protect against disease, we can really breed the rabbits well, just with grass. Since the 1970s, students in North Korea have been encouraged to raise rabbits to help with meat quotas. They're cheaper to raise than pigs or chickens, are low in fat and high in protein. And as the saying goes, they breed quickly. In our house, we keep about 30 rabbits, and they give birth to about 150 babies a month. So we normally breed more than 1,000 rabbits a year. We produce more than 3 tons of meat a year. But critics say the program is flawed. They say breeders will never taste the meat they produce as they're forced to submit it to authorities. Eating out in North Korea is a luxury the majority can't afford. But those who do dine at this downtown restaurant will find plenty of rabbit on the menu.
Rabbit meat tastes good and it's very nutritious, and it's good for people who are recovering from being sick, so I like eating rabbit.
For a country with little tradition of vegetarian eating, rabbits like these ones could go a long way to help filling hungry bellies.